Good day, everyone, and welcome back to Rehab Gaming. This is going to be another episode in the series of Grinds My Gears. As you can tell, we have a Nintendo 64 cart sitting here on the table. I have a game bit screwdriver. Don't worry about any of that. That's for a later project. But we're going to go over the reason why I have this cart sitting on the table, and the reason why it is a little irritating. So, when you look at the front of the cartridge, you'll notice that it is a copy of the NFL Quarterback Club 98. Now, these sports games, unfortunately, aren't worth a whole lot. They were mass-produced on the Nintendo 64 platform. In my personal opinion, some of them are really not that good. This cartridge, I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory on. So, I made an order on eBay, and I noticed that the seller hadn't shipped something, and it had been over a week. So I messaged the seller, and I said, hey, I haven't received a ship notification for this item I purchased. Can you give me a status update on this item? Has it been shipped? I was wondering if there was a possibility that the item had either been, one, dropped off and the proper tracking hadn't been assigned to the package and that it was either in transit, or two, the seller sent the shipping information out to the parcel carrier and just hadn't shipped the item yet. So in this instance, the item was shown as shipping information being received by the parcel carrier. However, it never was logged as being accepted by the carrier. So, to make a long story short, basically, I was able to get in contact with the seller. The seller apologized. Seller stated that he had an issue. It was a reason that was understandable. And he said to make it up to me, he was going to send out a second cart and ship the item immediately, which I ordered. So, a few days later, got the parcel and opened it up, got the copy of the game that I originally purchased, and got this copy. And what I know about the games for the Nintendo 64, the sports games aren't really that collectible, and it really didn't pay too much of a never mind because I already got what I ordered. And we're going to go over the reason why this cartridge is suspicious. Now, a disclaimer, I don't know if the seller actually had ill intent. I don't know if somebody else did this previously, or if the seller was doing this on purpose. So some sellers will actually take parts from some games that are worth a little bit more, that are damaged, and swap them out with parts from games that aren't really worth anything, and ship them out so they look in better condition than what they really are. And that's kind of easy, especially when it comes to the Nintendo 64 cartridges. The dual clamshell design is pretty much standard for whatever region, with an exception of one thing, and that is the regional lockout feature that Nintendo used in order to prevent certain games from certain release areas from being able to be played on certain consoles from other release areas. For example, the North America version has a lockout feature on the back of the game. It's a physical lockout feature that prevents you from being able to insert Japanese games and being able to play Japanese games. It was a form of physical region lockout, and we're going to go over how this applies to this specific cartridge. So, as you look on the front, you see the oval Nintendo seal. This indicates that this is a North American release version. It also says the model number with the USA in brackets, and then it also has the number at the bottom that also indicates a region code of a North American release game. Now, when we flip the cartridge over, that is obviously not English. That is, I forget the technical term for the characters, but that's a Japan back label. It says made in Japan, NUS JPN-1. So the NUS JPN-1 indicates that this back for the cart is a Japan region back, and it's been placed on a North American released front. Now, I don't know what game is actually inside this cartridge. I would assume that it's going to be the NFL Quarterback 98, since these aren't really worth a whole heck of a lot. But we're going to go ahead and grab a North American release version and show you the differences on the back of the cartridges. So, as you can tell on the back of the cartridges, this is a North American release version. This back should actually be on this cart. And if you look down here, you can see these little tab cutouts in the back of the cartridge. This was the physical lockout feature for the region lockout for Nintendo's N64 platform that they used. And this is one of the ways that they try to prevent North American games from being played in Japanese systems and vice versa. So as you can notice, the back here where the clips are, you have the inset portion for a Japan console. So this will actually fit in a Japan console. These cutouts on the edge are what we used to here in North America for North American releases, and they're on the corners. So if you line these two up, you notice if you try and stick a North American release inside a Japan console, it ain't gonna work. And vice versa, if you stick a Japan release game inside a North American console, it's not gonna properly seat down, and the pins aren't gonna connect. So what happened is this seller either, one, didn't have a lot of knowledge on Nintendo 64 games and got the game like this at somewhere like a swap meet, garage sale, maybe another seller on eBay. Honestly, more than likely they probably got it from a garage sale or a Goodwill store or something like that. Didn't really know a whole heck of a lot about it and just purchased it for resale online. Or this seller knew exactly what it was and had some nefarious ideas to restore a game that is a little more sought after. So I don't know the reason why they would have changed the back cover of it. This back cover, if it was on a Japanese released game, it doesn't look to be in that bad of a shape. It can be cleaned up. Like I said, I don't know what the deal is behind it, but as you can tell, they don't match. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go ahead and crack this open. All right. So in order to break one of these cartridges open, you just pull out the two game bit screws, and then the two halves will pull apart. In order to separate a Nintendo 64 cartridge, the best practice is to separate the top open a little bit and carefully slide it back so it will release these tabs down here, and then you can just pull the back of the cartridge case off. So this does have shielding on the inside. Looks like the shielding is secured with two small Phillips head screwdrivers. So give me a second. I'm going to go ahead and retrieve a small Phillips head screwdriver from my toolbox, and we're going to go ahead and pull that shielding off. So go ahead and remove the shielding. There are two Phillips head screws that secure the shielding to the inside of the game cartridge. This also is what holds the chip of the game cartridge in place inside of the cartridge itself. So we'll go ahead and take these two screws off. And just remember, Phillips screws heads are always going to be used on the inside of cartridges. The game bit screws are always going to be used on the outside of the cartridges. So just set them off to the side so you remember which one's which. And also the game bit screws, if you pull one out, is slightly longer than your Phillips head screws, and you can normally tell the difference based on that. It is a slight variation, but also because of the different type of heads, you definitely know that it's going to be the game bit screw is used on the outside of the cartridge. So we're going to go ahead and separate this shielding here, and we're greeted with our chip and main board. So we'll go ahead and pull this out. This other section of shielding can stay on the game cartridge. Now, if you were going to clean it and stuff like that, or if you wanted to replace the shielding, it does pull out after you remove those two screws, and then it just sits back in there inside the clips. And it is a little bit of a chore to try and make sure everything is lined up perfectly, and then it just drops right in. So we're going to go ahead and set this half of the case aside, and we're going to go ahead and look at our chip and board. So this piece right here is the piece of plastic that makes sure that the contacts remain aligned in the center of the cartridge. It's also supposed to support the board for when you're placing the cartridge in and taking it out of the Nintendo 64 console. This is supposed to be a form of a stress relief for the pins, to also make sure, like I said, that the pins line up properly and that they get properly seated inside the console. The biggest thing to remember with these are that you remember one side has a notch at the top, the other side does not. So in order to make sure that these are properly aligned when you install it back in the system, just make sure the notch is on top, and then your back of the case, or the front of the case, I apologize, the notch is going to be towards the back, but it's going to be on top with the front of the case down, and then it just drops into place, and then you just maneuver that into place. But we'll go ahead and set this off to the side. As you can see, there's a little bit of residue here. It looks like at some point in time there was some sort of a liquid on the inside of this game cartridge. I don't know what this liquid could have been from. But we're also going to look at the main board, and where you see NUS 018-02. That's going to be the stamp number for the type of game that it's supposed to be. You can look it up in Google to double check to see what type of game board that is supposed to belong to. This does appear to be a authentic Nintendo board, but we're going to grab a little bit of isopropyl alcohol and Q-tip just because I'm curious about that residue that's on the edge. A lot of times when you're inserting and removing a game from the console, the main stress point on these boards is going to be right here where you see that edge, where this black edge is actually holding the main board. And what can happen over time is that removing and inserting the cartridge multiple times can cause the little electric traces here that you can see, the little green spots that are shiny. Those are circuit paths on the board itself. And over time, they can become damaged, which makes it to where the game does not work any longer because there's not a connection in these circuit traces. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, rub off that residue that you see right there, and we're just going to go ahead and inspect the traces real quick. And it looks like the pins on this side, on the chip side, are going to be just fine. None of the traces appear to be broken. The pins are actually in really good condition. There's really no oxidation on the pins whatsoever. There's no oxidation on the board. So, like I said, I don't know what this residue is from, but normally if you see a board that has been in contact with water, it would cause some copper corrosion here on the pins, which turns green as it oxidizes. And the oxidation actually prevents the pins from making proper contact with the connector inside of your console. So we're going to go ahead and wipe off this residue on this side. Make sure we get it all off. And then we're going to go ahead and inspect the traces on this side and make sure that they are not damaged. So, I'm going to go ahead and use the other side of this Q-tip with a little more alcohol. I didn't get off all of the residue that I wanted. I want to make sure that I can see the traces clearly, make sure that there's nothing obscuring your ability to look at these small traces, because they are quite small. It is quite difficult if you are inexperienced in looking at electrical components and examining traces that you'll miss a break. A break can be very tiny, and it could be really easy to miss. It could just look like a little spot of a dust or some type of debris on top of the trace, when in actuality that's actually a break in the copper trace itself. So we're going to look over the traces, and most of the traces appear to be fine. Where you'll see them break is right here just above where the pins are. All the traces appear to be fine. There doesn't appear to be any break in the traces whatsoever. And another thing to look for if you're trying to verify the authenticity of a board, some of the reproduction boards will actually be laser cut or might actually have really sharp edges. So the original Nintendo 64 boards for the game cartridges themselves were manufactured where they could be snapped out of a larger board assembly, so when they're doing mass production, you have multiples of boards in this sheet. And this sheet is processed, gone through, the components are inserted, and then they go through a solder flow process where it goes into a bath of solder that gets into these contacts, fills in the through holes, and solders the components to the main board itself. And then later on, they go through and they actually pop these boards that they're going to use for the insides of the carts out of the large sheet of multiple boards. So looking at this, it appears to be a genuine Nintendo cartridge. It has the rough edges at the tops right here and on the sides where the board has been weakened in preparation for it to be snapped out after the entire process of soldering all the components in and installing them inside the system. These aren't going to be uniform whatsoever where the break points are, because it's going to be manually removed from the larger board with all of the components and other main boards attached to it. And so that is a authentic Nintendo 64 main board, as far as I can tell. Now, later on, I'm going to do a little bit of research on the model number here. It's NUS 01A-02. Nintendo used different board models for some games and similar board models for other games. So what they would try and do is to reduce the production cost. They would produce PCBs that are similar to one another, that kind of function on the same basic principles as one another, and they could be customized. You see on this PCB board, some of the through holes are not populated with a component, so this indicates that the PCB board is designed for use with multiple different games. And it looks like the best way to be able to test this is to stick it inside a Nintendo 64 console and see what pulls up. So what we'll do is I'll go ahead and reassemble this, and at some point in time, in order to figure out exactly what game this is supposed to be, we'll put it into a Nintendo 64 console and boot it up from there. So the main takeaway for this video is going to be, if you are buying something off of eBay or online, make sure that if there's only one picture and you're interested in the item, ask the seller for additional pictures of the item. Ask the seller if he can show pictures of the back, the front, see if they can take it apart. I will caution you, though, some sellers who don't have game bits probably won't be able to take them apart if they don't know a whole lot about video games in general, or they don't know a whole lot about Nintendo 64, for example, how their cartridges are taken apart, so they might not be able to take them apart. However, if you get somebody who's quite experienced with video games, sometimes they will try and say, oh, I can't take this cartridge apart, because that's going to lessen the cartridge's value, which is total nonsense. You're not going to hurt the value of a Nintendo 64 cartridge by opening it up and by making sure that you get the proper chip that is supposed to be inside the cartridge, and just making sure that you're not getting messed over. If you're doing a hand-to-hand transaction, or if you're going to a game store, make sure that you bring a driver with you. And a lot of times if you're at a game store, ask the game store employee to open the cartridge, just so you can make sure that the chips are the ones that belong inside the game. Make sure you're not getting ripped off, especially if it's some type of rare title and they have it marked for a really low price. Do some research online, see what the game cartridges are going for whatever you're looking for or looking at, and see what a fair price has been, especially since this market fluctuates so much. It all depends on availability, how many different how many different games were released at that point in time, how many games were released for that specific region. If it's for another region, they could be trying to put some lesser valued games inside a cartridge and selling them off. Or, with game stores, it's not that the case. Game stores survive on their reputation. They have the reputation to uphold for selling legitimate products and stuff that is not manufactured, fabricated, or altered in any way because it can damage their position in the market. However, individuals like Craigslist individuals and stuff like that, I would go ahead and make sure that you crack open the copy, especially if it's for a price that doesn't necessarily seem legit, or just as a common practice, just to make sure you're not getting ripped off. And if somebody has a problem with it, you can always explain to them the reason why you'd like to open the clamshell, let them know that, hey, I know how to do this. If you do know how to do it, fantastic. If you don't, practice on your own games that you have at home. That way you're not damaging somebody else's property. And normally it would be fine. But if somebody raises a huge stink about opening it up, or if the price just doesn't seem like it should be for that copy, if it seems a little too low or what have you, I would steer away from that person. So in closing, I don't know if the seller actually meant to give me something that was obviously not going to work for my purposes. I have a North American released console version. I can replace the back with a different back for a North American release reproduction back, or off another game that doesn't work anymore and that cannot be repaired. Most of these games can be repaired by one method or another and test it out. Otherwise, I'm fairly confident in my abilities to be able to test out components inside of a system without the back clamshell. What I can do is I can put the PCB board back in, put the housing back on the back side, and then just be careful when I'm sticking into the console, not putting too much pressure on the contacts. Just double check to make sure what copy of game this board is supposed to be for. So I appreciate you joining me today with another episode of Grinds My Gears. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like down below. If you'd like to see more videos of similar things, of us tearing apart some consoles, cartridges, doing some refurbishment, doing some restoration on some of these items, please subscribe and click that bell notification. That way you're notified every single time a new video comes out. So other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day, and thanks for tuning in.